As the leading professional association dedicated to infection preventionists, APIC provides the resources, thought leadership, education, and comprehensive training to help you protect those in your care. More than 15,000 IPs globally depend on APIC to help them develop and manage top-tier infection prevention and control programs. Join APIC today and unlock exclusive benefits such as educational content, access to cutting-edge research via our journal, and networking with peers to propel your career to new heights.
You are listening to the 5-Second Rule podcast presented by APIC, the Association for Professionals in Infection Control and Epidemiology. This podcast is produced by the APIC Communications Committee and is intended to be a conversation between our hosts and professionals practicing in the infection prevention and control industry. You will learn and be entertained, but most of all, we hope you will be inspired by our community and the work of our peers. And now, on to the show.
Welcome to the 5-Second Rule podcast. We are your hosts. I'm Kelly Holmes, and my preferred pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Lerenza Howard, and my preferred pronouns are also she, her.
Today we have a great discussion. We're going to dive into the Joint Commission infection control updates for 2024. And to join us for that discussion, we have Natalya Rosenberg, a senior product director in the Department of Global Standards and Certifications at the Joint Commission. In this role, she's responsible for developing and maintaining accreditation requirements for hospitals and non-hospital programs. Welcome to the show, Natalya.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the show, Natalya. I'm pretty sure Kelly and I, in addition to our listeners, we are very keenly wanting to listen and hear your perspectives on being a Joint Commission surveyor. So, Natalya, share with us, tell us how you became a Joint Commission surveyor.
Yes, absolutely. I do survey intermittently in the hospital program, the Joint Commission. Being a nurse by professional background, I trained to be a surveyor about 2 years ago. Visiting the field periodically, meeting organizations and their staff is critically important for the job that I do, developing and evaluating standards, because it gives you an amazing front seat view and an insight into where organizations are. Sometimes we see amazing accomplishments by organizations, and sometimes we see them struggle. And being knowledgeable about this range of performance, which sometimes can be very wide and sometimes not at all, helps me understand and balance the tough decisions on whether to introduce new standards, revise them, or retire them. Ideally, we would like standards that push us as a field, lead to better outcomes, but do not overburden organizations unduly.
That's great perspective, Natalya. I think that you have a very unique job role where you do get to see so many organizations around the country and to see what is working and how they're functioning from top to bottom. And it's really great to hear that all of that insight goes into generating the updates for the standards and making them practical for implementation across the country. So I had a question about the one that addresses the competency-based training and education for hospital staff with specific examples for high-level disinfection and donning and doffing PPE. Could you explain to us really kind of the depth and breadth of what Joint Commission is expecting there with the competencies and, what recommendations do you might have for successful implementation for all of our listeners?
Well, there are two parts to your question. So let me start with defining the expectations that the Joint Commission has regarding training competencies and competency-based training on any topic. First of all, unless required by law and regulation, organizations determine which activities require education, training, or competency. There's one caveat. Both training and competencies should be tied to staff-specific job duties. They should facilitate adequate and effective performance of job responsibilities. That said, keep in mind that not everything that you train your staff on requires a formal competency, which we define as something that we can observe and measure. So, the organization can decide where you need to require competencies, and that certainly applies to competencies associated with the practical applications of hospital policies and procedures on infection control. The second question deals with the responsibilities of the infection preventionist in this process. And it is true that infection preventionists certainly are responsible for overseeing competency-based training. They must ensure that training and competencies are consistent with nationally recognized infection prevention guidelines and practices. However, they do not need to provide all the training themselves. That indeed would be overwhelming and not always practical. Competency-based training can be provided by non-IP staff, provided that that individual has the educational experience, background, or knowledge related to the skill that is being taught or the skill that's been assessed for competence. I think examples are always helpful. Now, let me give you two examples of competency-based training and the variety of formats it can take and the staff who could be delivering competency-based training. For example, you can provide computer-based training and then have a post-test at the conclusion of the training to measure the individual's ability to successfully apply the knowledge. Another example, you can provide written education on a transmission-based precaution policy during nurses' orientation, for example. Then a clinical preceptor can validate the staff's ability to demonstrate the required skills in the policy. For example, the preceptor can verify whether the nurse is able to identify when precautions should be initiated, whether that staff can add the precautions to the computer, if that's what the policy requires, locate and hang the appropriate signage, obtain the PPE card, and so on. So I hope that these examples are helpful. I think that with infection prevention control literally touching every aspect of the work that we do in the hospital, with everybody involved in this effort, competency-based training on infection prevention can be daunting. However, the preventionists, the professionals, can certainly get help with that.
That is very helpful, Natalya. So I'm hearing a multidisciplinary team approach is kind of what you're suggesting. So everyone can meet and decide for that particular department what competencies may be appropriate, and then tackling it together as a team instead of it falling solely on the shoulders of the infection prevention team.
That is correct.
I think that that's very integral to know, and maybe some organizations, whereas there's that need to integrate that education and possibly utilizing more of an IP partnership in developing those competencies, ensuring that the appropriate education is being disseminated to the respective stakeholders. But I would like to ask you a question, because I'm pretty sure from your experience, you have a list of things that are frequently cited. But where my question, I want to focus on sterilization, because some healthcare organizations, they utilize vendors for their sterilization processes. So share with us, what are some recommendations that you can provide when a facility utilizes a vendor for their sterilization, and also instituting process improvement measures while addressing any high-risk findings?
Well, in the survey, we'll look at the issue of vendors through the prism of contracted services. Like any contracted service, vendors performing sterilization should be evaluated for quality of their service. One mechanism for doing so, which in fact is a Joint Commission requirement, is by establishing expectations for the performance of the contracted service, then periodically evaluating these services in relation to the expectations, and providing feedback to the vendor when these expectations are not met. You're correct in saying that a leadership structure is needed for that. So, and it is not a coincidence that the requirement, the standard regarding the quality of contracted services resides in the leadership chapter of accreditation standards. Astute leaders will recognize that they will need to get their infection preventionists involved in the process of defining those performance expectations and the metrics. It is through their expertise that leaders can assure that vendor services quality is high and that it fits the needs of your organization. I would also like to remind everyone that CMS and the Joint Commission requirements do require the infection preventionists to collaborate with all components of the hospital involved in infection prevention and control. However, leaders too are responsible for making sure that coordination happens.
So, Natalya, can you provide an example on what leadership structure would look like in, overseeing that contracted services for sterilization?
Well, it can take any form that organization wishes it to be. It's just important to make sure that all the parties that touch that service are involved. It could be a supplier, it could be facilities department, it could be transportation services as well. Certainly, another aspect of the vendor services could be the logistics of deliveries and so on and so forth. But infection preventionists, they come in terms of defining the quality related to the transportation, timeliness, and so on.
Oh, that's very helpful, Natalya. Thank you. And I think I hear themes of, making sure your data is telling a story and that is documented in committee minutes, whether it's infection control committee, evaluating those measures for the vendor or quality committees, identifying any problems, and then making sure that it's documented any follow through or action items that were pertinent to the findings within the facility. So switching gears, a lot of talk about the new IC 07.01.01. I feel like this one is, some of the language has been introduced to us before in influx of infectious diseases and making sure that the hospital is prepared for that. So a lot of hospitals do already have policies developed for things like Ebola, pandemic influenza, COVID-19. How should hospitals pivot to meet the intent of this new standard? Do you recommend creating a new policy that includes all of these high consequence pathogens? Or is it okay for hospitals to develop an individual policy for each high consequence pathogen? What is your advice for us on that?
Well, first of all, there's no expectation to address each special pathogen separately, since the identity of the pathogen may not always be known or certain at the time of the encounter in the emergency department, for example. The requirement requires screening using a syndromic-based approach. The presence of fever, rash, respiratory symptoms, and travel history to determine whether the symptomatic patient traveled to an area with an identified active outbreak or known organism of concern. We developed a frequently asked question, or an FAQ, on the new standard ICO 70101 that addresses this very question and clarifies several other implementation issues. So I would encourage everyone to locate it on the Joint Commission FAQ website.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. That is very helpful.
And I'm pretty sure some of the listeners are relieved in knowing that I'd have to develop a new policy for each high consequence pathogen. So thank you for sharing that information, Natalya. So one of the things that you noted initially was that from your purview, the goal isn't to overburden organizations, right? But being in the real world, some of the issues and barriers to IP programs and implementing best practice is due to the sheer lack of resources, including, educational opportunities, FTEs. They may work at hospitals, including safety net hospitals and or in rural areas where there's a lack of resources. So share with us what recommendations would you other healthcare stakeholders considering the fact that there is the existence of barriers and access to needed resources in achieving those key elements of implementing the infection control activities?
It is a tough question with no easy answers. I've always found that SHE and APIC organizations have done a good job in their publications on how to make a business case for the infection prevention and control programs. And that case needs to be taken to the leadership. Remember, performance on infection control indicators, outcomes, is related to reimbursement. Now, in the standards, the governing body is responsible for making sure that infection prevention and control programs are resourced to do their job. This is a COP requirement or condition of participation requirement, and it is now linked to the new standard IC 050101, and it will be assessed during surveys.
Thank you. No, that definitely, I'm pretty sure that empowers many of the listeners just to ensure that their IP programs are adequately resourced and to, explore that option of building that business case.
Yes, it certainly underscores the importance of the proper resources for the infection prevention program. So, Natalya, slightly shifting gears, we're all kind of pulling our hair out sometimes, I guess, depending on the manufacturer's instructions for use. And sometimes these can be, they're just so general, I guess, at the time that they were written, and they conflict with some of the stuff that we might know about the Spalding scheme, for example, low-level disinfection versus high-level disinfection versus sterilization, and the appropriate products to achieve that. Do you have any advice for us on what to do when no resolution is achieved when the manufacturer is involved?
Yeah, this is another challenging situation out there that we're well aware of. The one advice that the Joint Commission would provide is that when instructions for use are not clear or they're not feasible to implement for whatever reason, and there's no resolution achieved with the manufacturer, the organization should contact the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, their Division of Industry and Consumer Education, or DICE, for further assistance and without delay.
Oh, that's a great tip. I have not heard that particular piece of advice before, and you can believe that we are going to be using it. So thank you.
So, Natalya, just out of curiosity, if an organization does reach out to DICE, what exactly, from your experience, does that look like? What is the premise behind reaching out to DICE? Is the purpose to really assist in how best to implement best practice, considering the vague IFUs safely within one's organization? Can you shed light on that more?
I cannot comment on it case by case, individual cases, of course, but one of the things that FDA can enforce is that they can contact the manufacturer themselves, and that can be quite effective.
Okay. Okay. So could that potentially, just out of curiosity, if there was a number of healthcare organizations reaching out to DICE because there's a specific IFU that is vague and unclear, and now we're saying maybe possibly nationwide, just for an example, that many healthcare organizations are having an issue with this IFU, could that then evoke a response in the manufacturer developing something that is more
We would hope so.
fleshed out?
We would hope so. And I've
Okay.
heard from organizations that this approach has helped them.
Okay. Okay. That's good to know, Natalya. So, what advice do you have to the IP who is new, in which we know that there are probably many, to leading their IP program and new to even interacting with an accrediting body such as a commission? And say, for example, their accreditation is looming and or their day of survey is soon to be expected. What advice can you share with that IP?
Well, first of all, I would advise the practitioner to find who the accreditation contact or specialist is in your organization and make sure that that person gives you access to the documents that the Joint Commission has provided to all organizations on the extranet. This includes the new Infection Prevention and Control Assessment Tool and Survey Activity Guide. Familiarize yourself with these documents because they will help you prepare for the survey. Now, during the survey, make sure your organization policies and procedures are available if they're needed. Remember, we survey you to your policies and procedures. And in terms of communicating with the surveyors, the team, my advice is to communicate with openness and confidence. Know that the Joint Commission surveyors strive to give you a fair evaluation. If you cannot find a document, if you're unsure of the answer right away, do not be afraid to say, I'm new at this job. Can you give me a little more time? Can I get back to you soon on this? In non-critical situations, when reasonable timelines are provided, surveyors will typically accommodate.
I'm pretty sure people can breathe a sigh of relief with that because I can only, from my experience, it seems like it's such this, stressful time, stressful situation. Of course, many other stakeholders are, on pins and needles possibly. So definitely being able to take that time and to be honest and state that you are a new inventionist and give yourself that grace to navigate this new process. Partnering with an accrediting body, I think is very important. Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, I agree. And as you move through your first survey or your fifth survey, it is always such a learning experience. So speaking from the infection preventionist to Joint Commission, we are grateful that you are so helpful in guiding us and, the education that we walk away with on how to better implement the standards. So your perspective is very, very helpful. One of the nightmare situations that, I hear over and over again, especially from newer IPs is, I went on environmental rounds in a particular department and noticed X, Y, and Z, and made recommendations in a report that I emailed to the director, please follow up with these corrections by this day. And then I go back and they're not followed up on and nobody is listening. And now I'm worried that, we're at risk for a recommendation for improvement from Joint Commission. So what advice do you have to help calm those IPs when they do find and recognize things that are possibly out of compliance, make recommendations for improvement within the hospital, and then those are not followed up on, that then could result in an infection control citation when Joint Commission comes?
Yeah, those situations happen, unfortunately. I would say if you have reached out to the department and you've asked for action and it's not happening, the advice is to escalate the issue to the hospital-wide Quality Assurance and Performance Improvement Program, which is QAPI. Under CMF's conditions of participation and our standards, the hospital must demonstrate that they track hospital-acquired conditions, including hospital-associated infections. Also, they must track infection control-related errors or incidents, events. Furthermore, QAPI, which is hospital-wide, must demonstrate that the program acts on those problems. If infection control compliance in your facility is found to be serious or widespread during survey, and surveyors get a sense that the governing body and other leaders are not involved, that they have not made an effort to remedy the situation, have not facilitated collaboration, and have not put an effort to prevent future errors from happening, that can result in a citation of the QAPI condition of participation deficiency, as well as the citation at the standard level of 50101.
Yeah, I know that I would say to that, and Natalya, please share your insights. I know that, one of the concerns as that IP, the example that Kelly shared related to that IP, it then falls under this infection control finding, right? And I know how it feels to internalize that as the IP at that respective site. Now this is a finding within my area, and really feeling a sense of ownership and responsibility for it. What advice could you share, Natalya, if now this is something that the IP has presented to stakeholders internally? Hey, this is, they're sounding the alarm and they followed that process that you just recommended. What should the IP internalize in that experience of now they've escalated this issue, this concern that they had. They knew that it was going to be a finding if found. Now it's found. What recommendations can you share to that infection preventionist that is experiencing that?
Well, I would say print out the standards and show it to your leaders. The standard of 50101 does not say the infection preventionist addresses the problems in infection control. It says the governing body oversees, and I'm probably misquoting, but paraphrasing quite frankly, oversees that the QAPI program absorbs and addresses the issues in infection control. So the ownership is quite clear in that requirement, and the CMS conditions of participation as well. So those are also widely available to the public and can be printed. So that is my response. Infection prevention and control is everybody's responsibility in the organization. We as surveyors do not see it as the sole responsibility of whoever happens to be driving that big ship, which is the infection preventionist or professional. They have a huge job to do. We all know that. So I would say communicate, locate those standards and documents, and point out to your leaders that it is a shared responsibility.
I know I feel empowered, Kelly, just sitting here listening to Natalya.
Yes. I'm hoping everybody that's listening just, had a sigh of relief. You do take it personally because, we invest a lot of our time and love into this program, and you make a recommendation and you see it followed through or not followed through. And, then you get a citation for it. And even if it's a double citation, one in joint or one for infection control chapter and then one for the leadership, you do still take that home with you and take it as a personal hit and thinking, well, I did everything that I could to prevent this from happening and it still happened. And, that is a heavy weight. So I think that the multidisciplinary approach and certainly, putting that into perspective to to do your best to take the standards to the people who can make the change. And, and at some point, you have to be okay with where it is. So thank you for that explanation.
And so now with us talking about how empowered we feel, right? I'm pretty sure that there are a plethora of misconceptions about joint commission. So I would like for you to share with IPs, what are some of the major misconceptions that you've encountered in your experience as it relates to the Joint Commission?
Well, I just touched upon the first one. And there's this natural tendency, yes, by infection preventionists to see any deficiencies and citations at the IC chapter as their own shortcoming. I would say we shouldn't do that. Infection prevention and control is an awesome, huge responsibility, and it cannot be successful without everybody involved. First and foremost, leadership. So please give yourself grace, as you said, Lerenza. The second major one, that a misconception that I would like to get across, is that the Joint Commission does not benefit if individuals or organizations don't do well on surveys. Not at all. On the contrary, we want you to succeed. So to that end, we've made some effort recently. So we took the infection control chapter that was getting quite old. We rewrote this, we simplified the structure, we aligned the requirements closer to the mandatory CMS conditions of participation, and we increased transparency by providing organizations with the infection prevention and control assessment tool. In the future, we will also launch a web-based resource center on infection prevention and control and antibiotic stewardship, in which we will include resources that align with our infection control requirements and much more. We'll be sure to communicate when that resource center goes online, which we anticipate will be in August. So please keep an eye for those updates. But overall, infection prevention is one of those most frequently cited chapters in our surveys. And another sort of analogous situation would be environment of care standards as well. And that is only so because the physical building is enormous. And the areas where infection control and prevention and control apply is also enormous. So there will be findings. There will be findings. So I would say infection preventionists should not be discouraged easily. You're doing an awesome job that is critically important. And keep doing a good job. Coordinate with others, and apply pressure to your leaders.
Well, Natalya, I think that that's a great way to end the episode. I know that you've empowered Kelly and myself. As you've noted, is absolutely integral that as it relates to, any of the Joint Commission findings or any of the partnership that you receive from this regulatory body, it's absolutely integral that to take a multidisciplinary approach. It's not, solely the responsibility of the infection preventionist, and also utilizing the resources that are easily accessible to you. If, you have those resources within your facility, they're free resources that the Joint Commission provides online that infection preventionists can utilize within their realm of work to empower them and to also to reference when citing different standards and guidelines as well.
Yes, thank you, Natalya. You have shed light on the hot topics that have been circulating in our community. So it is very helpful to hear your response and to direct us towards the resources that you mentioned online and with the FDA. So really, really appreciate your time, and for all of us to remember that Joint Commission is our partner in protecting patients and always striving to, get to a better place. So thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to APIC's 5-Second Rule Show. We want to hear from you. Visit us at www.5secondruleshow.org. That's with the number 5, where you can contribute to the conversation. Make sure you subscribe and rate us wherever you listen to your podcasts. We're so appreciative of the hard work each of you do every day to make a safer world through infection prevention. Remember, IP stands for Important Person. You are awesome. Stay safe, and we'll see you next time.